How's it going? I have yet another gimbal I'm going to review here. This one is the Feiyu A2000 single arm pistol grip gimbal. It has a 4.4 pound weight capacity. It has a battery life of about 6 hours. It has a lot of nice features which also happen to be very similar to its competitors these days. So I'm going to keep the tech talk as brief as possible this time so we can focus on footage, but I do have to mention a couple of the features. Number one, and the main selling point for me for this gimbal, is that you can easily remove the handle, just like that. For me, transporting a gimbal is a real pain because of the length, and the fact that you can reduce the length by taking the handle off is a big deal. And Feiyu supplies you with this little rubber cap so that you can put it on the handle and store it more safely, because there's little electrical contacts here that are very delicate, and if you didn't have this cap, you'd be exposing them. Another thing that's kind of unique about this gimbal is that there's this rear button that you can press, which is on the back behind the normal buttons. If you double press it, it will spin the gimbal 180 degrees automatically, which can kind of be a cool thing to use. For instance, if you're filming a selfie and then you want to flip it 180 degrees and show the view. So I'll demonstrate that a little bit later on in the sample footage. There's also an optional dual handle configuration. I didn't get one of those, so I'm only reviewing it as a single arm gimbal. 360-degree rotation on the pan and tilt axes, quick release plate which is Manfrotto compatible, the ability to latch the camera into a certain position just by holding it there, and a mounting screw point so you can add accessories like an external monitor. Okay, so those are the features that matter most to me. I've had this gimbal for a few days. I went out and I shot a variety of things around town, and I decided to make it a little extra challenging by using manual only lenses. So the lens I've got right now is the LAOWA 15mm f2. This is a pretty incredible lens because it's really wide angle, 15mm on full frame, and it has a really wide aperture, f2. So you can shoot in low light, you can get shallow depth of field, and it's super wide. I thought it would just be fun to take it out and try it around in the daytime and the nighttime on this gimbal. And I tried it out with my HELIOS 44-2 58mm lens. This is my favorite lens for weird, swirly bokeh. It's just got a lot of character to it. Okay, let's go to the footage and see how this gimbal did. All right, what are my overall thoughts? Well, if I didn't have any other gimbals, I would say this one is great. It performs absolutely fine under most circumstances. I noticed a little bit of wobbliness in the corners with this 15mm lens. The lens has no stabilization built in, so I was basically just relying on the IBIS of my A7S II combined with the gimbal stabilization, which makes it probably less stable than something like the 16 to 35mm Sony lens would have been, because that one has stabilization in the lens. Also, I noticed that the gimbal doesn't really like shots like this, because it tends to correct the pan halfway through the movement, which results in a little bit of jitter. And in inverted mode with this lens, I noticed that I felt some vibrations in the handle. I don't know what was causing the vibrations, and they didn't seem to really show up in the footage, so I'm not really going to count that as a major negative on the gimbal, but it makes me a little bit worried when I'm shooting and I feel vibrations. And these little screws that you use to tighten the gimbal tend to work their way loose after a little while if you don't pay attention. So I noticed that sometimes I would set the gimbal in my bag or something, and when I would take it back out, one of these axes would suddenly be sliding back and forth, and I had to re-lock it and sometimes rebalance it. Another thing I noticed is that the gimbal tends to lose the horizon fairly easily if you're running and then you turn all of a sudden and you pan the gimbal. With other gimbals that I've used recently, I don't have as much of a problem with the horizon as I do with this one. And my final qualm here is that I couldn't use the app at all. I tried to download Feiyu's app that lets you control some functions of the gimbal, but when I set it to search on Bluetooth for the gimbal, it didn't find it. So either the gimbal that I have isn't emitting a Bluetooth signal, or there's a firmware incompatibility between the gimbal and the software. So overall, what do I think? Well, it's a great gimbal, and I think the main selling point for me would be removing this handle and stowing it as two separate pieces easily. That way I can leave the camera attached if I want and have it already be balanced, and then just throw the handle on when I want to shoot. That's a big deal when you're a traveling filmmaker like me. But I don't think it's going to replace the Moza Air as my main gimbal right now, because I just don't feel quite as secure with the stabilization on this. There's the horizon issue, there's the vibrations issue, and I also get just a few more micro jitters when I'm walking and when I'm running when compared to the Moza Air. So that's my take. If you want a really portable gimbal, I would say absolutely go for the Feiyu A2000. If you want a great dual handle gimbal that can be controlled from the handles easily, again, this is a great option. So I hope you've enjoyed the review, and I'll see you next time.
We'll be right back.